Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. This video is part 2 on the Mosin Nagant. In part 1 I covered some Russian history and the development of the 3-line rifle model 1891. The rifle saw action in the Boxer Rebellion and Russo-Japanese War, although very few made it to the front lines. 1904 and 1905 were disastrous years for the Tsar, as there was demoralizing defeat at the hands of the Japanese, military mutinies, and the 1905 revolution. What became a revolution started out as a peaceful march, but troops fired on demonstrators on what became known as Bloody Sunday on January 22, 1905. This was perhaps the moment when the Russian people at large lost faith in the Tsar. The Tsar's uncle was assassinated in March, and Nicholas was forced to make concessions, including starting a Duma, which had consultation powers only, and rights including freedom of speech, assembly, and religion. While this put out the flames, cinders still smoldered, especially as rights were again suppressed and the Duma's futility became apparent. Also, the Tsar's only son and heir, Alexei's hemophilia, constantly kept his life in danger. Fast forward to World War I, where the Tsar's incompetence, along with Empress Alexandra taking advice from Rasputin, led to even more unrest. Two revolutions in 1917, pulling Russia out of the war, and the Tsar's abdication of the throne and subsequent murder of the royal family led to the Bolsheviks' rule. Over the next 7 years, Russia was plunged into civil war where 7 to 12 million people died. The main small arm on both sides, of course, was the 3-line rifle model 1891. 1924 saw the civil war end and Lenin's death. Joseph Stalin had already started consolidating power within the Communist Party, and from 1924 to 1930, the party usurped powers from the government. Stalin was in control. As for the Mosin, the end of the Civil War saw a desire to upgrade to the now 3-decade-old design. The infantry rifle was shortened to the same size as the Dragoon, which is a 2.8-inch chop in length. The sights changed from arshins to meters as the Soviet Union went to the metric system after the revolution, and the front blade sight was replaced with a hooded sight. There were also minor modifications to the bolt and upper handguard. This became the most famous and most produced iteration of the rifle, the model 9130. Older infantry and dragoon rifles were converted to 9130s. Sestroyets ceased making arms in 1918, so 9130s were either built in Tula or Izhevsk factories. The early 9130s kept the hex receiver from the M1891. Simplification of production was sought, and starting in 1935 in Izhevsk and 1936 in Tula, all Mosins were produced with round receivers, as this took much less machining. This coincided with the start of the Spanish Civil War, where arms were sent to support the left-leaning Republicans against the right-leaning nationalists supported by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Among 9130 rifles, the hex receivers are more desirable and bring a little more money. There is a difference, even among round receiver Mosins, as pre-war examples have a much better finish, whereas wartime examples have a very crude finish. 10 years ago, when Mosins were still dirt cheap, I bought 2 hex receiver 9130s for a total of $200 at a local gun show. I gave one to my dad and kept one, a 1931 Tula. This was my first Milsurp firearm and was the gateway drug in starting my collection. Although I don't shoot my Mosins often, I forget how much fun I had shooting this when I first bought it, and shooting it now brings back good memories, and I still love how it throws fireballs. This thing is minute a beer can accurate at 100 yards, believe it or not, and for me it is one of the most accurate Milsurps. I know, everybody roll your eyes. After the 9130 upgrade, a sniper version came into being in 1932. There was really nothing special with the build of the rifle, just the best produced were set aside for sniper conversion. Originally they were equipped with a copy of a Zeiss 4-power scope called the PEM or PE scope. This was later replaced by an easier-to-produce 3.5 power PU scope, which is what the vast majority of the snipers are. The scope was mounted over the receiver, which meant the bolt handle had to be elongated and turned down. This way of mounting the scope also prevented the use of stripper clips, so cartridges have to be individually loaded. These rifles were made famous by the likes of Vasily Zaitsev, who you might remember from Enemy at the Gates, as well as several female snipers that you see pictures of all over your Facebook Milsurps and history groups, in the urban battles in Stalingrad and along the Eastern Front. I happen to own a 1943 Ishevsk PU sniper I obtained from Samco Arms back in the day. I have yet to really shoot it as I've had trouble getting the scope bore-sighted. I just need to take it out to the range and get the job done there. A carbine was developed in 1938 for artillerymen and signal corps troops who needed to be able to defend themselves from sudden attack. The M38 carbines were 8 inches shorter than the 9130 and lacked any ability to mount a bayonet, as it was thought these troops would not be involved with melee fighting. As much of the Eastern Front fighting took place in urban environments, a bayonet was desired, and the M44 is basically an M38 with modified handguard and an attached folding bayonet. I have an example of both of these rifles. If you had to lug a Mosin around for hundreds of miles, these are certainly advantageous rifles to have with the shorter length as well as the lighter weight. This also creates more recoil when firing, which is not so much of a noticeable difference for me, but it might be for a wholly fed Soviet conscript. I picked up the M44 from either Classic or AIM a few years back, and I recently acquired the M38 from a local gun shop within the last few months. They were both made in 1944 and both Ishevsk. Most Mosins produced during the Second World War are Ishevsk, as the Tula factory was evacuated in December 1941 when the Germans got close during Operation Barbarossa. While rifles were produced there during the war, they are a more desired find than those produced at Ishevsk, which remained open throughout the whole war. When looking at the markings, Ishevsk's symbol is a triangle with an arrow, while Tula is the star with the arrow. Fyodor Tokarev's SVT rifle, developed in the 1930s, saw the days of the Mosin numbered. It was intended that the SVT be issued to a third of the military, mainly because of its complexity. The Mosin was still intended to be issued with your average conscript. During the Second World War, PPSH and PPS-43s were simple, mass-produced submachine guns that served well in urban fighting. Semenov's SKS was already under development during World War II due to a desire for a semi-auto rifle that fired an intermediate cartridge. Even that was soon rendered obsolete by a famous rifle created by a certain tank commander, inspired by a certain famous German assault rifle. Although production of the Mosin Nagant ceased in the Soviet Union after the war, M44s were produced through 1948. Remaining Mosins were sent to Allied Eastern Bloc nations as exports, as well as produced by these nations including Poland, Romania, Hungary, and of course China, with the T-53, which is a copy of the M44. The Soviet Mosins flooded the U.S. market after the fall of the Iron Curtain, which is why they are so cheap for over 2 decades. Now, with more embargoes and the fact that those that made it here start to become a diminishing supply, the price to obtain a simple 9130 has gone up by an average of 2.5 times in the last decade, which means buying a few crates in the early 2000s would have been a great investment. I've also neglected to mention Finnish Mosins, as I intend to do a whole separate video on them in the future after I attain a couple more examples. But I assure you, I've not forgot about the nation that produced some of the best examples of Sergei Mosin's design. Please be aware of where your elected officials and the groups who claim to represent you stand on the Second Amendment. Please consider joining the GOA, the biggest no-compromise 2A organization along with your state organizations. If you like my content, check out some of my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. Also, check out my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and who I support on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.